I like to junk journal and art journal, but I don't have a lot of fancy scrapbooking tools and supplies. And since I also like to upcycle and recycle, the materials I use are quite a bit different than the coordinated papers, inks, stamps, and stickers that you might find at your local craft store. But I am trying to make my pages look more cohesive, and so I set out a couple of weeks ago to try to catalog all of my materials and supplies. And the idea behind that is that I would have a reference library to use for inspiration in planning and coordinating future journal pages. It's also had the added benefit of helping me to organize my craft supplies, and it's taught me a little bit about my skill set and my style. So today I'm going to show you that system and share a few simple techniques that you can use to add texture and depth to your pages without purchasing any new materials or tools. If you're new here, my name's Cindy and I dabble with a lot of different crafts, but always with an eye toward what can I upcycle, recycle, or repurpose. So not surprisingly, this journey started with junk mail catalogs, and I've done a couple of other videos in this series. In the first video, I covered how to take any kind of junk mail catalog and combine the pages so that they're a little sturdier, and also how to make your own gesso and add it to the pages. So I will link to that first video in the description box, so you can check that out if you're interested in making your own gesso and using junk mail catalogs for your junk journaling. Since a big part of junk journaling and art journaling is getting started and getting that first bit of color on the page, my second video covered 20 different very simple techniques to add that first bit of color to the page. So if you'd like more information on how I actually did the techniques, you can check that video in the description box as well. So to make these background catalogs, I started with the junk mail catalogs and prepared the pages with the gesso and combining the pages to make them a little heavier. And then I did some researching and experimenting to come up with the 20 different simple techniques. The other thing I did was I made some notes for myself. I named each of the backgrounds, wrote down which colors I actually used on the backgrounds, the process I used, any notes that I wanted to remember, and some other variations that I might try in the future. So the backgrounds are the first building block in this process, but then there's all the other stuff that you can put on your journal pages for embellishments and textures. And so to continue on with my cataloging of my supplies, I started pulling all of the things out and trying to kind of group them into different categories. So one of my categories was my rubber stamps. And like I said, I have a few, but I don't have a ton of things. And mine are definitely old school. They're still just plain rubber stamps. I haven't even really used them that much. And I just have a couple of ink pads. But since I haven't used them a lot and I don't always remember what I have, even though they're very easy to see in this container here, I decided to go ahead and put them into their own little catalog. And that helped me to kind of just see what they really look like. They're not always exactly what the stamp looks like, so it's a nice visual for me. To help me visualize on the actual pages, I stamped out the images on loose cards so that I could just lay those in place as I'm kind of working and designing my pages. So I can see at a glance the stamps that I have, what they actually look like when they're stamped out, and then I have a sample that I can refer to and use to actually lay on a page to help me visualize how it'll all fit together a little bit easier. So I have all of my stamps in this catalog, and room for a couple more if I end up getting any more. Now your categories might be completely different, but this is just how I segregated some of my craft supplies. Another idea I had was to do some edge treatments and to keep track of the punches that I have. So I have a little sample of all of my ribbon options. I have a few pairs of, fancy cut scissors, so that's another option for an edge to a page if you want to use that. I used my ink pad to just make a sort of black smudged edge for this sample. You could obviously tear your edges of your journal pages. This one was a burnt edge, and you can see that the flame gets away from you really quickly. So on this one, I wrote down my process to keep everything safe and under control. I have a few samples of paper tabs for an idea for the edges, and punched edge with my rectangular punch. This is just finger painted on a straight edge and a torn edge. I have some Sharpies, and I also have a gold paint pen that I like to use, and the sort of faux stitching is a edge that I also can do. And then we're into the punches that I have. I kind of store my punches in all sorts of places, so it's nice to have just a reference of all of them in both the positive and the negative version of the punch. So a couple other little punches that I have. I have a tag punch, and then I have a couple of, they're called pick punches, but you can actually punch through something as heavy as a credit card. So I just have this sample here to remind me that I have those punches as well. And then obviously this is on a ring that you can add many, many more samples to as you come up with new ideas. If you're a crafter, I'm sure you have a lot of tchotchkes like I do. So I just got a ring notebook for some of these samples. On this first page, I have a lot of buttons and a few other sequins and things, and these are items that I have multiples of. So I've just hot glued one sample of each onto this page so that I can reference it really quickly, see my colors and what I have. And I know that on this page, these items are stored in other places in my craft room. This next page is some tchotchkes that are just like kind of one-offs, and so I wanted to put them in a place where I could see them quickly but also access them. So they're just in little plastic folders here so that I can pull them out and use them if I decide that I want to work with them on a journal page. And so they're easy to see, and I know that I just have one or two of these items. And again, that's what this page is as well. And here's a similar idea. I have one or two or three items on this page, and there's room for me to add more items to this if I need to also. Another category of items that I have are things that I don't necessarily want to put in a catalog because they're just too many of them, like the stickers that I have and different things like that. There's a lot of variety and I have a lot of them. And so there were certain items that I just wanted to make a handwritten list for to prompt me to remember that I had some of these items. So I just put that at the front of my ringed notebook too, and it's certainly a list I can add to whenever I get new craft supplies. The other thing I have that I can't really catalog is all of my paper supplies. And I do have a few scrapbook papers, but mostly what I have are magazine pages. So I have a few things sorted out that are already cut out. I've got some sort of brown papers that I've tea dyed, music paper. And this box I have map paper, and then I have all of my junk mail catalogs. This drawer has old calendar pages in it. There's often a lot of pretty art on calendars, so I like to save those for my scrapbooks as well. This drawer has actual cardstock in it, so these are more purchased papers. I do have a little bit of stash of those. This drawer just has sort of odds and ends, old scribble books, coloring books, and comic papers. This is my drawer of actual scrapbooking papers, so I did buy this pretty book of travel type pages, and I have a few other scrapbook papers in there. I've got tissue paper and napkins in this drawer. And then I've got a couple other bins. This bin has just sort of single artwork that I think I might want to cut out. I've got old cards and envelopes in this bin. And then I have some odds and ends in here. I've got some gum wrappers, Monopoly money, and paint chips for using in my art and junk journaling. For my final category, I made a catalog of different prints and textures that I can make using some very basic household items. So for the first print here, I just used a regular paper tube and experimented with a few different patterns and designs that I could make. I did make these prints all in black because I wanted to focus mostly on the shape and what I could do with the shape. I also have a small cardboard tube that was on a roll of, I think, plastic bags or something. So I made a few different print designs with this small tube. For these next two prints, I used some pieces of cardboard, corrugated cardboard that I just kind of peeled back some of the paper off of to make a stamp for some texture on this page. And I made a similar print using some bubble wrap for this page. I just used my hot glue gun to make a little handle for myself so I could stamp the pages and make the texture. For this page, I used a bottle cap and I glued it to a rolled paper bead, but you could use a cork or something, and that makes kind of a pretty little rippled round shape. You can also use Q-tips to do different prints with. For this design, I just hot glued several Q-tips to a popsicle stick and then dipped it in the paint. I have a kind of a square plastic container that I used to make these prints with. This print was made by just dipping the edge of the popsicle stick into the paint and then stamping out some different shapes. For these prints, I used a plastic fork dipped in some paint to make a random pattern, a striped pattern, and some other different shapes. To make these clothespin prints, I took apart a clothespin and then just hot glued the wire mechanism back inside so that it would kind of be a handle for me. And that made the clothespin print. I used an old key to make these prints, and I just kind of glued a handle on there. I think this is a command strip of all things that's stuck to the key to make a little bit of a handle for me. This was made with this stamp, and it doesn't pick up a lot of paint, and at first I was kind of disappointed, but then I decided that this is just sort of an interesting and fun way to add just really more subtle texture. And this last one is just a couple of different sponge print options. So this side is the actual sponge side, and this side is the scrubby side. And then I tried to do sort of a really light coverage and a heavier coverage for both of them, just to show the difference between using more and less texture. So look around your house and see what shapes you can come up with to make some different prints if you want to make your own print catalog. So now, rather than getting out all of my craft supplies and making a huge mess, I can start with my libraries to plan out my pages, starting with my background choosing some different textures to add, helping me visualize the stamps that I may want to use in the project, and also visualizing the edges of my pages. I hope you got a little inspiration here today for your first or next junk journal page. And in next week's video, I'll show you some of my finished journal pages and how I used this system to assemble them. Be sure to click the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you'd like to receive the Upcycled Design Lab newsletter, check the description box for a link to sign up. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you soon back here in the lab for my next experiment.